Claire, we've dealt with straight strips, half square triangles, quarter square triangles. Your quilt has curved seams.
Yes.
And another form of template making.
Yes. So with these templates, I decided that I would actually use a method of putting contact straight over the templates. The reason I chose to do that is that sometimes if you're not really careful with drawing your templates onto template plastic, they might not be entirely accurate. And because these ones have the curve, I thought to eliminate any error that could have been if I drew the line in myself, I've decided to contact them. So all I've done is just bought a roll of contacts from the supermarket. I've got a copy of my templates here, which are just on ordinary paper. I put it through the photocopier and copied the templates. So I'm just going to get a piece of contact, which is a bit bigger than my templates, and cut it off the roll.
So you would never use cardboard as your base?
I do that, and I've made some templates like that for the English paper piecing method, and I'll show you how I made those templates afterwards. But yeah, for this method, I just find that this is quite quick and easy.
You like quick and easy?
Yes.
Because we can get more quilts done.
Yes, more time for sewing. So all we do is just peel the contact off one end, a bit like covering a book. So all you mums out there have had lots of experience covering books for kids.
Mine have outgrown that. I don't miss that bit at all.
Oh, I've got that to look forward to. Right, so plop it down, and then I'm just going to feed it across, and this will be the time I get a bubble, won't it?
Well, at least it's not their wonderful Superman fabric underneath that they're worried about losing. So this would actually help to make them quite a stable template.
Yes, I actually always put 2 layers on, just to give it a bit more stability and just so that the edge will wear a little bit better as well. So as you can see, we just continue down like this, and then I'll actually go back now and put a second layer on. So then once that's all done, just cut out on the dotted line. Now, if you want to be completely accurate, then try and split the line as you're cutting it. And so then you end up with your templates with 2 layers of contact on them. And you can see that we've got 3 black points here.
On both templates?
Yep. And we need to put holes in those so that when we trace the templates, we can mark these holes on our fabric, because we're going to use those spots to line up the pieces of fabric so we know how to sew them accurately together.
So that the curves fit together well.
Yep. So all I've got here is just a kitchen skewer. So I'm just going to put that through and just punch a hole through each of those. And don't stab your finger on the other side.
No, that could be painful.
Yes.
Do you ever use a wooden one, or you prefer the metal one?
Oh, it's whatever's in the
Whatever's
drawer.
handy?
Yep. If you want to use an ice pick, or if you've got a awl, if you use that with your sewing at all, you could use one of those as well. But whatever will give you a broad enough hole to be able to get your marking pencil through. Right, so that's making the templates. Now, I'm not going to draw these straight onto my fabric. I'm going to do what you've done previously and cut a strip. So we've got a 3-inch strip here, which will do the template A, and we've got a 4.5-inch strip, which will do the template B. And then I've cross-cut that into squares, so I've got 3-inch squares and 4.5-inch squares. And then it's just a case of marking them.
Do you find that you try to have something underneath when you're marking with a pencil that's grippy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of people use sandpaper. I don't use it very often, but I always use usually the road.
The mat,
yeah.
Yep, me too.
Right, so then we just lay the template on top, lining up the corners, and then we just trace around that curved edge. So once again, use whatever marking implement is best. I usually use lead pencil unless it's, you know, a dark fabric and I'm not going to be able to see the lead. And then just go along and mark those holes as well.
So very critical you don't forget to mark that in at this stage.
Yes, you don't want to take the template off and then have to reposition it. So we'll do the same with the template B. So, I mean, templates like this won't last forever, and they usually won't last as long as the Perspex one, but, you know, for a quilt this size, they more than amply do the job.
Well, it means you could draw your own in any size, whereas if you're buying a purchased one, you're limited to what's available.
Yep, very true. Right, so once we've done all of that, we just get our fabric scissors and come along. I prefer to do this with a pair of scissors as opposed to a rotary cutter because you've just got a bit more control.
So you've kept the straight edges with the rotary cutter, which when we cut the square, and now you're just doing the curved edge with the scissor.
That's right. So we're just going to trim these off.
Be a good little task to sit and do while you're watching a movie.
Yes, that's it. Or if a husband's feeling alone and needs some company, you've got something to do.
Yes.
Right. Now, we're going to pin these together. Now, the pinning process in curved piecing is really important because, as you can see, they're totally different shapes to try and get together. And more pins we can put in to hold them together, the easier it will be to put under the machine.
So where are you going to start?
Right, so I always position the centre one first. So I'm going to put a pin through here and then match it through on the other side. Now, I always like to work with the outermost curve on the bottom because it's going to be the inner curve that you're going to have to manipulate. So if you have the smooth curve on the bed of the machine, it's easier to feed through, and you'll see when I'm sewing that it's got less chance then of getting tucks in the top.
So you can actually see the pleat before it happens.
That's
and
right.
Avoid. Yep.
Right, so we're just going, so I haven't put that in, I haven't held it totally in position yet. I've just put it there as a stabiliser. Now I'm going to do each of the ends.
Pins really are our friends in patchwork.
Oh yes, very important.
And so you're going to leave them in and sew over them as I did as well?
Well, I actually pull pins out as I work, but I think that's, you know, a bit of a personal preference. I think it harks back to the days of textiles at school when we were told do not sew over the pins because they were sick of changing the machine needles. But I'm sure they weren't as high quality pins we were using either.
Yes, the finer needle or pin does make a difference, but yes, you can still put the timing out on the machine if you hit a pin. The machine mechanic likes me.
Yes, I'm sure. Now, I actually like to leave the pin on the outside and pin inwards.
So the reverse of how I do.
Yep. So, I mean, once again, it's, you know, a bit of personal preference. So all I'm doing here is I'm just immediately where those marks are, I'm just lining up the raw edges there. So that's as much as I'm worried about at the moment. So I'm just going to pin those three in place. So once again, just easing this around. This can be fiddly and you need to spend the time to pin correctly now because it makes all the difference when you come to sewing.
And the bigger the curve, the easier it is. The smaller the curve, the more fiddly.
Yep. So we've got those three pins in position and now we're just going to go back. I usually, with this size piece, I try and put two in between. So I just ease it around to fit.
And it will ease because it's all biased now.
That's right.
Yep.
And now I'm just going to pop the pins in here and another one there.
I mean, everybody has a personal preference when it comes to pinning and
That's
which
right.
direction to sew. And
Yep.
you just need to find out what works for you.
I think I've said to you before, my mother said that I always found the most unconventional ways to do things. So, but as you said, whatever works for you. Right, so I've got all my pins in place now and we're going to slowly sew the seam.
With so many pins, I would hope so.
Yes. Now, because we're sewing such a tight curve and I'm going to be stopping all the time, I've reduced the stitch length down to 2 and I've also got the needle down function activated that you've mentioned before. So now we're just going to pop this under the machine and start sewing. And sometimes it's a bit difficult to get that corner to meet exactly, but don't worry too much. As long as you keep that pin in place, which has got the two dots meeting, your seam will be in the right spot.
because the actual edge of the fabric where it crosses, where the seam crosses, will be straight.
That's right. So we're just going to grab hold of our threads and we'll start sewing. Okay. Now, unlike Michelle, I'm going to stop and take the pins out as I go. So here's number 1. So just take it slowly.
That's probably my problem. I'm too anxious to get to the end of the seam, so I just sew over.
Now you see the fabric can start to catch a little bit, so just as you're sewing, just ease it around. If you find that you're getting too big a pleat happening, just keep the needle in the down position, lift the foot and just rearrange the fabric a bit.
Release the fold.
Yep, and then just keep sewing.
And the beauty of the smaller stitch would give you a smoother curve.
That's right. So we'll see all that when we open it up and press it.
Hope you have a lot of pins in your pin tin if you're going to chain piece this.
Yes. Although I did find when I sewed the quilt, I would do sort of 8 or 10 blocks at a time because it just got a bit tedious sitting there and pinning for so long, and then so at least by doing a group at a time, then it sort of broke up the monotony of it. Now you can see I'm getting really close here. It looks like I'm about to get a fold. So I'm just going to lift the foot and just rearrange the fabric a bit under there.
And because the one underneath didn't have any excess fabric, we
That's
know
right.
it's definitely going to
Flat.
be flat.
Yeah. Right, I've got to the next pin. And once again, it looks like I'm getting a bit of a pleat there, so I'm just going to rearrange that a little bit. And then sew through to the end. Right, so as you said, I would chain piece, but just, here we go, we'll get the needle up. Okay, and we'll just pull that out. So there's our completed seam. You can see where there is the possibility that you could have gotten nicks in it, and if you do, you'll just need to go back and unpick those sections and
just a few stitches where there might have been an issue. And
just sew those sections. Now, this is a quilt that you can press either way. I tend to find that it will be a little bit happier folding over towards the smaller piece, and that's the way that I actually press my quilt.
You could find too that if these were 2 different weights of fabrics, that might determine which way it wanted to go.
Yeah, that's true actually.
Whereas these are both from the same range, so the base cloth is the same weight, so either way would be okay.
Yeah. So this quilt's just got 64 blocks like this, and then it's just the actual arrangement of the smaller units to make the blocks, but all of that's in the magazine. So that's curved piecing.
Well, curves isn't that easy either.
No, it can. Well, it's one of those things again, it's just attention to detail, and if you spend the time to pin properly and sew slowly, then you get a good result.
Good preparation, nice finish.
That's it. We're going to look now at foundation piecing, and the project we have in the magazine illustrating this is a lovely little houses quilt by Kerry Gadd. So, Michelle, can you explain a little bit about foundation piecing for us?
With foundation piecing, Claire, we're not actually physically cutting anything into a true size. We're actually using a pattern that's either drawn onto an interfacing style base or onto a paper base, and we're going to sew through that layer to actually create the block.
Okay.
So our pattern lines are actually our drawn lines.
Right.
Rather than our cut edge, which we've used previously.
Okay then.
There's 2 types of foundation piecing. I personally love it because I find it very accurate. The first thing we have to decide, Claire, is which type of foundation piecing we want to do. In some cases, with the paper, it's harder to see through. You have to pull it out at the end, so you need to know whether you want to have just the single thickness of the fabric, or if, like Kerry's, you want to leave the foundation in, you actually do end up with that extra layer of thickness in your block. So
it's a bit stiffer.
It is, but it's not a problem with it. You just need to know which one's better for the unit that you're actually making.
Right.
It's really good. Like, there's tiny little seams in here that are only 1/4 of an inch finished, and foundation makes doing that type of thing really easy.
Yep.
which to cut that and keep that accurate would be quite difficult.
Yes, very hard.
Consistently.
Yeah, I mean, it is a technique used a lot for miniature work, therefore. So
it is, and we've previously done a Mariners compass, which would normally be template work. We did it all with paper foundations.
Yep.
So for this project, Kerry's chosen to use the foundation that's going to stay in her work. You need to find an interfacing style product that has no give in any direction.
Right.
Before you even start to draw up your pattern, you actually need to pre-shrink it. It does actually shrink a little bit, so you need to take it to your iron and actually iron it with a wool setting, not too hot because you'll actually melt it.
Yes.
So if you pre-shrink, you can then come back and, in Kerry's case, cut out a square slightly bigger than our finished piece and then draw up the pattern that we're actually going to make.
Okay.
Gary's pattern has the numbers on it, and the numbers are actually the order of piecing.
Okay.
She's continued the lines in her pattern right out if they're on the edge, but if they're internal, she's actually stopped at a crossover point. With this one, when we come back and trim at the next stage, we don't want to go too far into the next area. So foundation piecing for the beginning is upside down and inside out. It's a bit unconventional to your normally piecing. So,
yeah,
as
I've done it a couple of times, and it's just really, each step I've just found that I've got to really concentrate. Okay, am I putting the fabric up or down, back or front?
Which way is my right side facing out, or should I have it right sides together
That's
at this stage? Exactly. So don't be concerned. Make a sample block, please.
Yes.
This one, our first piece down is actually the window in our house. So piece one, Kerry gives you all the sizes, and she gives you a generous size piece. She does give you an indication in the pattern. You can't cut them to size, but she gives you a generous size, and that's the best rule of thumb I can give you for foundation piecing. Definitely make your pieces too big. We can always trim down, but you can't add to it.
Yep.
So piece one is our window, and it is going to be, from this side I just need to see that, from the drawn side I need to see that it's extending past all of those lines. But when I flip the block over, that the right side is facing out, because this is actually the finished side of the block, not the side that we're sewing from. So that's step one, to pin that one in place. And no, you don't sew at that stage. If we go to the next sample that Kerry has, she has her house colour pinned on. So she has matched the raw edge, so she has it pinned onto the seam between 1 and 2, the line between area 1 and 2. In this case, this is a batik. It doesn't have a right and a wrong side, so that does make it a little bit easier. But you would want to place the right side of the fabric to the right side. So at this stage, you're not actually covering area 2, which is what you actually do want to cover. I'll just unpin that guy, because what I do at this stage is to actually double check that you have well and truly covered area 2 plus a seam allowance on all your edges around 2.
Right.
So Kerry's given us a nice generous piece. So once we've checked that it's okay, now we can sew. With this, as I said, because these are smaller, I do like to put 1 or 2 stitches into that next area, but not too far, because we need to come back and trim. And if we're too far into that area, then we're not going to be able to fold it back to trim. So we're going to sew a little couple of stitches into area 4 and also into area 7 to sew this in place.
Okay then. So what stitch length are you using with this technique?
Because the foundation is staying in the work, I don't actually have to shorten the stitch length too much, but in this case it is a smaller scale block, so I'll actually take my stitch length down to 1.8 because it's a small scale piece, rather than because I want to remove the paper at the end of it. If I was piecing on paper, I would actually do a stitch length of 1.4 so that it gave more perforations and made it easier to pull out. So I have only just taken it 1 stitch into that next area. You have to remember that while we're sewing this, you actually want to make sure that you have got your iron leaving it on a wool setting, because if you put that right up to cotton or linen, you're going to melt this whole thing after you've drawn it up. So it can be advisable to just finger press as you go, and then you can fold back. In this case, area 4 is okay, but I need to trim it off up the top here. And the beauty of using this type of thing is you can actually just faintly see through that seam line there, so I can now cut. At home I would actually use my rotary cutter and ruler, but today I'll be a little bit naughty and I'll just freehand across there. So that's now covered that. I've got excess there, but I'll trim that at a later stage.
All right then.
So that means now that if I've gone from 2, I can sew 3.
Yep.
And already we're starting to see the block come into life. So I can line up the top of that. Because I know that Kerry has made this big enough, I'll just hold that in place and sew. And just double check that it hasn't folded back on you underneath, which it has. So you see, cheats don't prosper.
No.
It should have been pinned. And I didn't. So now I'll pin it, and now it won't fold back on me.
So even the pros can't take shortcuts.
Hey, you just don't see how much I unpick. And we do, we all unpick. Fabric moves, and the telephone rings while you're in the middle of the seam, and you jump and you lose your sewing line.
And this is another project to always keep on top of your threads, isn't it?
Look at what's happened.
Oh no!
Even though I pinned it. So we can't use that, I'll have to unpick it. So at this stage you're really thankful that I didn't shorten my stitch length down to 1.4, because it would not be nice to pull out.
No.
And the unfortunate thing with a banana is that the seam is going to be really good, and that's not going to be easy to unpick. I don't have to unpick the whole lot, I just need to unpick where we've got the fold. But don't stress. As I said, I didn't think I'd be demonstrating unpicking quite so easy after saying that I do it. And the stitch unpick is still packed in the box. So I've grabbed a needle because it's actually got a thicker end on it, so I could see what I was doing. One more and that's released. Okay, trim that out of the way. Maybe I'll pin it across the top this time.
That'll hold it.
There you go.
Yep.
I'm not going to move this time. And that's the feet, the teeth on the machine have just pushed that as it's gone under the foot. But we do all unpick. Although, I'll do a cheat. I can't find my bobbin thread. And if I don't hold the thread on this when I start, it's going to lock up. So I've done one stitch, so now I can pull my bobbin thread to the top, so I know exactly where it is when I start. Which is something you need to know when you're quilting. So I've actually sewn the entire length again. Clean up those guys out of there. There you go, flat seam.
Very nice.
Okay, so once that's done, you're just going to continue building around the block, as Kerry has here. So you just keep building around until it's all completed up to the roof, following colours and numbers.
Right. And she has an extra trick on the roof, doesn't she?
She does.
So we'll start with this sample.
What we've actually just demonstrated with this folding back was quite a small piece for that to have actually happen on. The roof is a bigger piece, and so to stop it happening on the roof section, Kerry's actually done a line of stitching 1/8 of an inch past the finished line of the roof. So outside where you're going to sew. And what that actually is doing is basting that roof section down so that you're not going to get any pleats along that roof.
Right.
So once that is done, you can then trim that back. And once you've trimmed that back, that then gives you a lovely guideline for where you're going to put the background down on. And then after that, the cream background goes on and you're able to complete your block.
Fantastic.
So, and again, to stop the block itself actually moving around, Kerry's done another line of basting at the edge. So the whole block is a bit ratty at this stage. You actually trim it back to 1/4 inch past your solid line on your pattern piece. After that, the construction is just the same as on our other straight set quilts. And that
Join the blocks into rows.
the blocks go into rows with sashings between.
Yep.
You can see that the basting stitch is lost once the seam is done, so it's within